All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining our session today on the supply chain risk outlook for 2026. My name is Andy Gibbard. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at EiQ, which is LQA's supply chain intelligence platform and solution. I'm really excited to introduce you today to two of our experts who are going to lead you through this Outlook presentation. So firstly, Jaime Rua, Head of Client Solutions based in the US. And secondly, Salim Abdullah, our data scientist based in Hong Kong. And I'm in the UK, right in the middle, so we're really covering all of those time zones today. I'm just going to mention a few housekeeping points before we kick off. So you will be set to mute with your camera off. That is just to avoid any interruptions during this afternoon's presentation. There is a Q&A function. We'd love to hear your questions, so please drop in anything that you want to ask on this topic or beyond into that box. We'll sort through those questions. We'll respond to as many as we can during today's session. Any that for whatever reason we can't answer today, we will come back to you on individually. So if you ask a question, you will get an answer. Finally, the webinar will be recorded. You will get a link to the recording, which you can access via the email address that you registered with. And if there are others who you think you would find this session interesting, please do forward it on to them as well. That's about it for me. So I'm going to now pass over to Jaime to kick us off.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Andy. So before we dive into the details of the webinar, I want to frame how today's session will flow and what we're trying to accomplish here. So first of all, we're going to start with, we're going to zoom out and look at the bigger shift and what's happening around global supply chains. The world has changed, trade patterns are moving, and disruption is being more and more frequent. So that is happening at the same time that the scope and pressure on responsible sourcing teams is also changing. So we are going to start looking at that new reality. Then we'll also start looking, and we are going to share a few of our main risk signals and what are they telling us in this new update of 2026. What's staying persistent? What are the emerging trends? What are the ones which are becoming more relevant? And where should you probably be focusing on? And then finally, what we're going to do is we will get very practical, and we are going to be focusing on key sourcing regions and be highlighting where should you probably be paying attention on those key sourcing regions that we are going to show. Okay, so in the next slide, what we're going to show you is the global context that we have today. Cool, this one. So what we have seen is that the context that we're operating nowadays is a really tough and complex context. We have been seeing disruptions coming from every single direction. So we have seen supply chain incidents such as pandemics, strikes, fire incidents. We have seen the trade wars and geopolitics impacting most of the sourcing regions that we operate in. We have seen a lot of shipment detentions, mainly driven by withhold release orders and UFLPA, the UFLPA detentions as well. And we are also seeing how extreme weather, it's not only, it's no longer occasional, but it's becoming routine, whether these are heat waves, floods, typhoons, or whatever they are. All this is happening at the same time than the rules of the game. So it's happening while the rules of the games are changing. So what we're seeing is that regulatory, there's an increase in regulatory complexity, and there's also a change in the speed that these regulations are changing. We're seeing a lot of cyber attacks in the different companies and also in their supply chains. And also artificial intelligence is changing the speed at which these changes are impacting. What this flags or highlights is the need for new business models, which helps us to stay compliant, resilient, but on top of that, that they help us to stay responsive when these disruptions appear. So how is this affecting the responsible sourcing teams? In the next slide, what we're going to see is how the situation has changed. We are now in a very tough spot. I really like the title of this slide. So we are in a situation where the budgets and where the expectations are not aligned. We're seeing three main things in terms of expectations. First one is how the scope is increasing. Managing only our tier one, it's not enough. We are required to manage tier 2 and beyond. And we're also seeing how traceability requirements are needed more and more. Disruptions. So we just mentioned quite a few of them. Global disruptions are increasing and from any type. Like we are seeing them of all different typologies. And then the third part, which makes this much more complex, is how all that regulation is expanding, it's changing the requirements they have, and it's making them much more diversified than it was before. So we're seeing more due diligence and more reporting. And that additional reporting is not only requiring us to show the numbers, but show the management systems behind it. So what did we do? And that is happening at the same time that the budgets are not increasing, so are being kept flat, or even they are being reduced, right? Some of you are probably seeing that. So more has to be done with less, with the same or even less capacity. So on here, with that expectations and with the available resources, artificial intelligence, so AI application is probably not a choice. That's probably a must. But that it's not going to be the topic for today's conversation. So let's take a step back and let's go into the global risk landscape. And before that, let me start with a quick summary. Okay, just a quick reminder. What we have in EiQ is risk ratings for over 100 countries, where we have the data from national, but also in some countries have sub-national country. We're providing risk ratings even at province level. Some examples where we have this type of detail are China, India, Vietnam, United States, Mexico, etc. And we evaluate the risk ratings for 5 key dimensions. These are labor, health and safety, environment, business ethics, and management systems. Inside each of them, you will be able to deep dive and see the specific indices that we evaluate, such as child labor, domestic migrant workers, forced labor, etc. We will be showing a few of them today while we evaluate the different regions that we have in here. And just as a quick reminder, when we display the risk ratings, we have 2 main data sets, one that we call supply chain, which is based on our own audits, and the other one, which is called civil society, which is based on global trusted external organizations. And the data that we will be presenting today, it's based on the first one, supply chain. Okay, so data coming from the on-site audits that we have in EiQ. That's very important to mention. So in the next slide, what we are showing here is what's the main update of EiQ. This is the 2026 supply chain risk score. These are the 107 countries that we have rated in EiQ based on that audit data, what I was mentioning. And probably the main message that we want to communicate here is we haven't seen dramatic changes in here. So for example, we haven't seen any significant changes from countries which were in higher extreme risk, changing suddenly to a low risk in the last 12 months at least. But still, there are a few things that we want to highlight. And we want to use this opportunity this time that we have today to deep dive and discuss some of these topics in detail. So as I was mentioning, although the supply chain risk scores have been kept quite stable, there are now more countries considered in extreme risk than ever. So we've never had this number of extreme risk countries. We have 4 in 2026. These ones are Haiti, Madagascar, Myanmar, and Nigeria. Okay, these 4 ones that you can see in dark red in the map that we're showing you here. And in the left, so in the right hand side, what you can see is the evolution of how the countries that have been considered extreme, high, medium, and low have been changing over the past 3 years. Okay, so since 2024. Few other things that we wanted to cut out today in this map. We every single year we constantly add a few more countries. This year, as I was mentioning, we have 107. We have added Estonia and Macau. And if we would need also to flag what is the country or the region where we've seen a most positive improvement in terms of risk, that would be Cambodia. Okay, where we've seen an increase in terms of overall risk. So considering the 5 dimensions that I was showing you earlier, of about an 8% improvement. Okay, on the opposite side, the country where we have seen a worst year-on-year deterioration, that would be Eswatini, with above a 13% worsening in terms of their overall risk. Okay, in Africa is where we have seen that same trend in quite a few countries, where, for example, countries such as Angola, Lesotho, Nigeria, Rwanda are experiencing worsening situations of more than 10%. Again, in terms of the overall risk. So this is the global picture that we have right now. But what we want is to also be able to focus on some of the regions where we have seen higher issues or like more issues in the last few months. For that, let's deep dive into the impacts of the ongoing crisis that we've seen on the Middle East. The news that we are seeing, that we are all receiving, often focus on military strategy, on negotiations, what are the global energy markets, oil price, and even sometimes they focus or they flag issues around global food safety and some products and some key materials such as the fertilizers. But there's not a lot of discussion about certain groups of people, which are in fact very large in these regions, and can be also very vulnerable. These are the migrant workers. As we all know, in Middle East, the migrant workers are considered the backbone of the economies, especially in the Gulf countries. There are estimated to be more than 30 million of them. You can see in the chart that we have here on the left, the division of these 6 countries that we have in here. You can see how many that are estimated to be in every single country, and more importantly, what's the percentage of the workforce which relies on foreign migrant workers. They mainly come from India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. These are the 3 key countries where they come from, and they are mainly working on the private sector. Okay, there are 3 ones that we would like to highlight. Construction, hospitality, and retail are the ones relying more on them. These workers have been historically been exposed to significant risks, so that's not something new. And one of them, or probably the main one that we wanted to flag here, is the forced labor risk. Okay, what we have in the center of the slide is the 2.02, which is the forced labor risk index for 2026 that we have for Saudi Arabia. And what we and these type of issues have been flagged previously or have been highlighted by the public scrutiny, particularly in international events that have happened in the region, such as the World Cup or the World Expo in Dubai. What has changed with this recent conflict is that the war, what has worsened their situation mainly into different dimensions. The first one, what they're facing is restricted mobility. Most of them, they cannot leave the country because of that restricted mobility that we were mentioning, or because of the exposure to violence that they have. Many of them work in critical infrastructure, such as energy or transport, which are often targeted by the attacks. So what we have seen is an increase on this type of workers being affected by the attacks that are happening in the region, and we can see in the right hand side of the screen some of those examples that have been covered by the public media. Not far away from there, in Asia, we're also seeing the impacts from this crisis. In the next slide, what we will focus on, what we will cover, are the energy restrictions in 3 main countries, okay, which are Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka. Okay, these countries are also dependent on the energy imports from the Strait of Hormuz, and a very good example is Bangladesh. Okay, in Bangladesh, so electricity in Bangladesh is largely powered through liquefied natural gas. This one mainly comes from Middle East, and in 2025 there was an estimate that 2/3 of their LNG came from the Strait of Hormuz. What this has caused is a disruption in their households and in the private sector, whereas there is no bypass for this combustible, in contrast to, for example, other ones like oil, which can travel through pipelines. So we have seen this happening there are 2 main sectors that we wanted to highlight. The first one is the urea factories, where we've seen a huge impact due to the reliance on this type of combustible. 5 out of 6 urea factories have had to shut down or suspended their production since early March. And also apparel, one sector which is probably one of the most important in the country, has had to reduce hours of work or even close the factories due to this increase in utility costs. In India instead, we're not talking about LNG, we're talking about LPG, so liquefied petroleum gas. They're facing similar issues, especially sectors like ceramic manufacturing. This has been one of the most impacted ones, as it is an energy-intensive sector, very dependent on gas. Okay, and India, as you probably know, is a very significant producer of these ceramics, especially the region of Morbi, which is India's ceramic hub. And in that region, almost 80% of the factories are estimated to have shut down due to these circumstances. This also is affecting the migrant workers, which it's estimated that over 400,000 of them have been impacted. And what we are seeing is that as they have been affected in the sectors where they work, but also in their households, as the price has increased for example, cooking gas, and there are also being shortages, it is not affordable anymore for many people. And what we're seeing is that many of these domestic migrant workers are reportedly returning home. Similar thing happens in Sri Lanka, where we're seeing incredible, like really high increases in petrol and diesel prices of over 30%, impacting mainly transport workers and informal workers such as riders and vendors, which are squeezed by this higher cost and the weaker demand, like following all this situation. And now what we are going to do is, let's go back to the global picture. And in the next slide, what we're going to do is focus on how the forced labor situation is evolving. So what we were just highlighting in the slide about the Middle East, we want to analyze how it is evolving across the globe. What we're seeing is that forced labor continues to be an area of concern in multiple countries. You can see here in the map the ones which are highlighted again in dark red. Those are the ones considered extreme risk. And what we've also seen is that during this last year, so during the 2025 and the half of 2026, that during the first half of 2026, there have been quite a large number of withhold release orders which have been issued. Some good examples are seafood one in China, the one affecting salt farms in South Korea, bicycle parts in Taiwan, the one about automotive parts in Serbia, in Mauritius, the one affecting clothing, and the last one in Mexico, related to coffee and affecting Finca Monte Grande. Sorry. These concerns, so the concerns that we have seen, extend beyond only foreign migrant workers, and they also impact other vulnerable groups, as it can be disabled workers in the South Korea case that I was mentioning earlier, or the indigenous populations in Mexico. And one thing that we wanted to flag in here and highlight, it's not only the reliance on these foreign migrant workers and the labor agencies that we will cover now in a second. It's also that we have seen an emerging pattern where we're starting to see foreign migrant workers appearing in countries where historically these were not common. These two countries where we're seeing this trend are China and Vietnam. So this is one of the key things that we wanted to highlight in here, and that we will be monitoring closing for the next few months to see how it evolves. With this, I'm going to handle the word to my colleague Salim, that he will get us through the next few slides, and he will show us a few additional numbers and a few additional details. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jaime. Moving on to the next slide. Building on that, we want to dig deeper into the audit data that we have collected, and one of the specific metrics that we do collect is around the percentage of suppliers that use labor agents. So what we see here is that for Japan, USA, Canada, and Malaysia, this sits in between 50 to 60%, but Taiwan sits exceptionally high at 80%. Even for countries such as Thailand, South Korea, Sri Lanka, India, and Italy, is still above 25%. This is concerning because the risk of forced labor tends to increase where labor agents are involved, especially so when it involves the employment of migrant workers, be it foreign or domestic. Over the course of the past year, we've seen specific cases. So from the news, we've seen investigation finding exploitation of Chinese workers as subcontractors of luxury brands in Italy. And from audit data as well, we've seen workers who did not possess their own personal bank accounts have had their monthly salaries being paid by the facility into the accounts of the management instead. In Netherlands, there was another case where foreign migrant workers from Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland, who were sourced via labor agents, reportedly paid fees for visas, transportation, and work permits, totaling up to 700 euros, and they were never reimbursed either. All of this sits against the backdrop of the current global business context. So in the next slide, I would like to highlight quickly on the current status of the global business context. So the chart on the left shows that global insolvency has been on the rise across every region. And looking at the headlines from the past year, we've seen some big brand names such as Saks, Lycra, Claire's, and Nisolo declare bankruptcy. And this has a direct impact on supply chain and workers, including in how this extension of payment terms to suppliers, freezing of payment to suppliers, layoffs, as well as unpaid wages. Of particular note was the bankruptcy of the Australian retail giant Mosaic Brands, which impacted 23 factories in Bangladesh, which employed around 40,000 workers and are to this day owed $30 million. But bankruptcy and insolvency is just one part of the changing business context. In the next slide, just want to quickly touch on the impact that the tariffs have had as well. We have been tracking this since the moment it has come into play. And from audit data as well, we can see that the average size of factories has been decreasing across key sourcing regions since the tariffs have come into effect. And this is a trend which we have also seen from our Sentinel data. In the next slide, we have a quick summary of the trends that we have seen from the layoff signals from Sentinel data as well. So on the next slide, we can see that the Sentinel, which is our adverse media scanning tool, shows a similar trend where over the past year, we have seen layoff events increase as well, showing that these shocks are being faced by workers. But again, layoffs are just one aspect of the impact that are being felt by workers. Another one is in how the withholding of wages are affecting workers as well. So to compare this, we took a look at a more granular data set at a subnational level. In the next slide, we review the data set that we were able to acquire from Credit Guangdong and Credit Zhejiang, which are describing how the number of companies that are being reported for withholding worker wages have been increasing every quarter in the past year. And also that export-oriented sectors have been accounting for a growing share as well. So for sectors such as apparel and textiles and hard goods, they are particularly at risk. And this is so because pricing pressure and demands squeeze margins, suppliers are likely to react by shifting that pressure onto workers and how wages are paid out as well. All in all, this is to note how the insolvencies and bankruptcies that we see in the headlines do cascade down the supply chain and have a direct impact on workers, and that we need to heighten the scrutiny and monitoring of supply chains as a result. But to do this, the first question I think that we want to ask, or the first point that we'd like to take a closer look at would be the visibility of supply chains, which brings us to our next point on transparency, where the rates have remained largely stable in the recent years. And while it's good news that things have not deteriorated significantly, this also means that the same issues that we have faced over the previous years still carry forward with us into this time of global disruption in supply chains. As such, the issues that we are familiar with require us to take a look at it with fresh or multiple perspectives. An example of this would be in how we take a look at fire safety violations. In the next slide, what we have is a comparison of the fire safety incidents that we see from both audit data and Sentinel data. So from audits, we know that fire violations are quite common, and we tend to see it very readily in most of the key sourcing regions. And Sentinel can be a good complement in most of those cases. But what would be of particular interest is for a country such as China, where due to the maturity of the industry, we are less likely to see fire violations from audits. But even in such a case, we can see that Sentinel is still able to generate over 100 signals related to fire events. And this shows how both data modalities can complement each other, which brings us to our next point on the importance of data diversification. So to take a look at this, we analyzed a subset of our data where we took a look at factories which have had at least 2 full scope audits covering the last 2 calendar years, and comparing the topics that are available for both audit and Sentinel, and seeing how the different data modalities complement each other. And we saw an interesting, we observed a number of interesting correlations in how for wages and benefit violations, we are able to identify them via audit for issues such as payroll fraud and underpayment, as the in-depth document reviews are better suited to uncover these issues compared to Sentinel. But for the case of humane treatment cases, which covers incidents such as discrimination and harassment, Sentinel was better suited to pick up these incidents than audits, which makes sense, as audits provide a point-in-time assessment of compliance rather than be a tool of real-time or continuous monitoring like Sentinel does. Yeah, and then with that, I'll hand over to Andy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Salim, and thank you, Jaime, for that, for all of your insights. Yeah, loads that we covered. We will come to Q&A in a moment, and we do have a few questions that have come in, but I'll just quickly wrap together the kinds of things that we've heard so far. So what we've heard from our experts is that 2026 has really seen a compounding of these different disruptions and a coming together of these different disruptions. We have the already complex landscape that Jaime mentioned. We're already in a tough spot. Then comes, you know, the ever more complex geopolitical situation. There comes, you know, the energy crisis. On top of that, the growing number of incidents that we see around forced labor, and resulting impacts from things like bankruptcy and tariffs as well. Who is on the hook for that? Ultimately, these pressures land on the workers. They will filter through. They will end up with the workers. And so the people in your supply chains will be the people who ultimately feel the most pressure and have most adverse impact when these issues really come into play. We've heard that the visibility into the risk landscape is not uniform, is uneven. There are some sourcing markets where there's more opaqueness, there's less transparency from things like audits, and we've heard in particular that newer sourcing markets can carry some blind spots. And then finally, we've heard that the solution to that is data diversification. The solution is using audit data, both our aggregated data and your own audits, using adverse media data, using every data source that you can get your hands on, and that's how we work in EiQ as well, really combining that, analyzing that, and using that to give you, firstly, a 360 view of your program and your supply chain, and secondly, to give you a continuous monitoring approach rather than a point-in-time approach and the risks that gaps in between creates. So that is my quick summary of what we've heard. Thanks again to Jaime and Salim. But before we let you off the hook, we are going to just turn to a few questions. The first one of which I'm just going to throw to both of you, if that's okay. So we've had a question on whether we can elaborate further on risks, on forced labor risk in Brazil, and whether we can provide anything around regions, feedstocks, and sectors where risk is most prevalent. Jaime, Salim, I'm not going to put you too much on the spot for this. What I will ask you just to do is really to explain how we would go about doing that in the EiQ. If you can provide any off-the-cuff insights, great. But yeah, I don't expect you to have that full encyclopedic knowledge of every country. So maybe describe the approach a little bit, and any remarks on Brazil in particular are also very welcome. Jaime, I've just seen you come off mute, so we'll start with you.
I can start with that one, and then let Salim complement with anything he has. But yeah, so for Brazil, we have the same approach that we have for most of the countries that we've shown. Brazil is a country where we have a decent number of audits, which allows us to rely quite a bit on that data set. So not only, as I was mentioning, when we cover a country, we use the combination from the supply chain, which is the one based on our own audits, and the civil society, the one based on public trusted sources. In Brazil, we have a good combination of both, which allows us to have a really good assessment in there. And the few things, so Brazil, first of all, key highlight, Brazil is considered high risk. It's close to the threshold with medium risk, but anyway, it's still on the high risk bucket that we have. And the key three things that we're seeing in Brazil are, first of all, forced labor. That's the top one issue that we're seeing considered as an extreme risk. Second one that we've seen is freedom of association. that's not only the second key driver of risk, but also it's one of the issues with a higher worsening rate. So we've seen the score of freedom of association to get minus 10% in terms of risk. So also the not only the score, but the trend is very concerning. And the third thing that we're seeing there is unauthorized subcontracting index. That's like the third thing that we're seeing. Although in contrast to the freedom of association one, what we're seeing is a slight improvement compared to the previous period of 12 months ago. If we look at the 5 pillars, if we would want to provide a bit of a more comprehensive situation, the labor and the business ethics are the two main areas where we're seeing a higher level of risk, and this is linked to the 3 issues that I was providing. In terms of products, there are a lot of them which are being flagged in Brazil. All sorts of cocoa, all sorts of cashew nuts, clothing, livestock, footwear, pineapples, bananas. These are some examples of extreme risk considered products that we have from Brazil. This is like a quick overview based on the data we have here in Brazil, but let me know if you have any other follow-up question. Happy to answer it as well.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jaime. Really thorough answer. That's really good. Salim, I'm going to turn to you now with 1 or 2 questions. So first question, 2 questions for you, and they both are a little bit more on our data, how we collect our data, and so on. So firstly, and this one in 2 parts. How frequently are EiQ risk ratings updated? And aside from that, how do you capture fast-moving developments between those updates?
Got it. Thanks, Andy. The geography risk ratings, they are updated twice a year. That's on a structured release cycle, and this provides a stable baseline for sourcing decisions and reporting for clients. Between releases, for fast-moving developments, Sentinel, which is our adverse media monitoring tool, this runs continuously throughout the year, every week, picking up facility level events like fires, layoffs, strikes, and bankruptcies as they are reported. So if a supplier in your supply chain is flagged in the news, it surfaces before the next ratings update.
Great, thank you, Salim. Super clear. And then the next question is actually on our Sentinel Adverse Media tool as well. And the question is, how does that tool collect data? What is the database or the data source behind our media monitoring solution?
Right. So Sentinel is an adverse media scan tool. So how this is conducted is usually done with a mix of how we scan the web for news articles. So this is done by casting a wide net using tags. So think of keywords such as forced labor, child labor, and other issues that you would use to locate these articles. This is done in both English as well as local languages for different geographies. And we also curate a number of different local sources to enrich the database as well.
And just to add up to what Salim was explaining, those local sources, these are probably the issues which are easy to miss when screening your suppliers or your supply chain, especially in some countries which tend to be harder, where the information tends to be harder to export. So getting the right sources and the right government hotlines and the right NGOs reports or public grievance mechanism is really key in order to understand what's happening in your suppliers in those areas. was just that quick comment.
Yeah, thank you, Jaime. And I just have one to add, actually, just because this seems to be getting quite a lot of attention on the Q&A. The other thing I'd add here is that adverse media monitoring for EiQ and for EiQ's users is really a twofold. So one layer of that is monitoring your own suppliers and looking out for incidents within your supply chain, or perhaps when you're onboarding or screening new suppliers, and really doing that on a site-by-site level. The other layer, which comes more into what we've been talking about today, is this aggregation and looking at incident trends. So for some of these issue types, which Salim mentioned, are more likely to be detected via media than audits, we can really look at the trend and use that to determine or to add to the view on inherent risk. So really, the beauty of using this as a data source is that it adds both of those dimensions. Firstly, more robust inherent risk, and secondly, a very granular site-by-site kind of safety net between audits or between other data points. All right, we're going to go into a couple more specific questions now. And Jaime, I'll stick with you for these ones. You mentioned foreign migrant labor. Could you give examples of countries where that's now appearing in global trade despite not historically being flagged? So what's new here?
That's a good one, and likely I have the answer on here. So we mentioned two main countries in the slide. I think this was a slide about the forced labor, where we were saying that it was still a continued concern. The two countries that we mentioned in this slide were China and Vietnam. These are the two countries where we're seeing this trend more now. It's not that we're seeing more than other issues, it's that we are starting to see something that we historically were not seeing. What are we seeing in the case of China? And not only China, I'm gonna tell you the province. So especially in Yunnan province, what we're seeing is large numbers of workers from two countries, which are Myanmar and Laos. These are the foreign migrant workers that we're seeing there that we didn't used to see them in the results from the on-site audits. And the violations that we see related to these type of workers include passport retention and wages below the legal minimum. That's for China. Second country that we mentioned was Vietnam. The nationalities that we are seeing are also two. They mainly come from the Philippines and from Sri Lanka. Although the violations related to these cases, as in the case of China, it's a bit more clear. In here, it's not yet that widespread. So we're still not seeing them. And there are a few other countries that we did not mention in the slides, but we are already seeing slightly trends in the same way, which are India with Nepalese and Bangladeshi workers. And in Cambodia, similar, again, small scale patterns emerging from workers from Myanmar. These are the few things that we've seen. Again, hope that detail was useful.
Excellent. Thank you, Jaime. We're coming up to time. We have about 2 minutes left. I think we can squeeze one last question in, and I'm just going to go in order of first received. But I do like this question as well because it's one that comes up quite a lot. And it's about our risk ratings. Is the increase in findings of risk simply a result of doing more audits in certain regions? And Jaime, would you like to please close us out with that one?
Of course, and the answer is no. So how we consider, how we calculate the risk ratings, it's, let's say, so we look at the prevalence of findings, not because we've done more audits and we have found, in, let's say, in absolute terms, more findings related to forced labor or foreign migrant workers or any specific issue. It means that we will rank the country, let's say, worse than their neighbors or than other countries. What it means is that we will be looking at on a per audit basis if the findings are more recurrent or less. So the more we do audits, or the more audits we have, we will be considering how prevalent we're seeing them, and again, on a per audit basis. It is true that on some countries where historically we haven't had, or social audits have not been done, there could be some type of correlations between auditors getting better, being more enforcement and more experience and better management systems that could help auditors to capture this type of things. But that would be the only thing. If we consider countries where the social audits have traditionally been done, no, the answer then is that should not be the case. I don't know if Salim, you have anything else you want to add, that you're the big expert on this one, but if not, I think we're good with that.
No, but I think you got it all.
All right, great stuff. Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Jaime, for all of your insights today. It's been really useful for me, hopefully for all of you in the audience as well. Loads coming up from EiQ to get excited about. We have some events coming up all around the world, and all of these events will include an element of consultation on our big update to our URSA audit standard. So we're moving from URSA 3.0 to URSA 4.0. URSA sits behind everything EiQ, sits behind how we produce our risk scores and so on. So it's a real enhancement opportunity for the whole EiQ community, and during some of our events, amongst providing insights and so on, we will also get your thoughts on that. So we have a large global summit event in London in June during Climate Week. We have a smaller, more intimate roundtable event in Hong Kong also in June, and then in New York we'll be back in September for another global summit, where actually we will officially launch URSA 4.0. So we'd love to see some of you at those events. You can find out all about those events and about URSA 4.0 and everything else that we're doing on eiq.com. So please do check it out there. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions today. We will follow up with you individually. And thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.